Excellent. Welcome everyone. Tonight we are going to be looking at photo restoration, and I've got a few other notices and things to share with you. So let me bring that up. First thing to note is that, remember we were talking about some of the project votes may not be appropriate because of lockdown. One of them was glamour. Bit tricky if you can't get into a studio. So we found that there's one in October that was called Steps. So we just swapped them over. So July is now Steps. The website is up to date. July is now Steps, and October is Glamorous. We've just broadened the scope of that topic a little bit. So July is now Steps. In that debate on WhatsApp, someone was suggesting a From My Window project, but actually I thought, well, that's a good lockdown suggestion for the photos you're submitting on lockdown. And also in September, it's the project vote is Windows. So if you want a little inspiration on the project vote for September, and maybe as part of the lockdown submissions, From My Window might be a good topic. But tonight we're going to talk about photo restoration, and that is going to come in four parts. Firstly, mostly photo restoration revolves around old prints. So the first challenge is, how can you digitize an old print so that you can start editing it? And then there are techniques about editing, colorizing, and then what do you do with it afterwards? How can you export this photo? How can you share it? And we can look at a little upscaling trick I learned recently. So first things first, digitizing. Given that they are mostly going to be prints that you need to restore, you've really got two options for getting that picture digitized. There are more. You could send it away to be scanned. Jessop's could do it, and a variety of other companies could do it for you. But you can do a very good job at home with either one of these pieces of kit. Most of us have got a camera and a tripod. A friend of mine who's done an awful lot of photo restoration and digitizing the family archives, he's experimented with lots of different techniques, including conventional scanners. He found that the best and highest quality imagery he could get was to stick the photo on the glass of the patio doors on the outside, put the tripod and the camera outside, and photograph the thing in daylight. And he found that he avoided all lighting, color balance problems by using natural daylight outdoors with a high resolution camera. Even if you can't fill the frame, you've still got enough there to digitize and crop down to use the imagery. So if you've got a scanner, great, they do a good job. But if you don't go out and buy one. Experiment with just setting your camera up and shooting outdoors. Just stick it to the window in the daylight and set a tripod up and see what results you get. So now I'm going to go into some of these, and I'm going to use Photoshop for that. I know you don't all have Photoshop. Some of you will have Elements. Some of you will have other programs. The techniques I'll talk about can apply pretty much anywhere. The tools I use maybe called something different, but essentially all of these programs have something similar. And the techniques that I'm going to show you, hopefully, will get you out of trouble. So first things first, let me share with you Photoshop.
Evening, Chris.
Hi, Paul.
Okay, you're seeing that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm going to edit this photo, and this is 100%. And if you look at the information, this image was only 1 inch by 1.5 inches, or in real language, 3 by 4 centimeters. So it's a small image. It's actually a contact print. That's my nan.
Alert from Google Chrome. 3 other cops involved.
Keep talking.
Hell's going on?
Yeah.
Let me mute you all. Hang on a second. I'm just going to mute you all.
Sorry.
You can unmute yourself if you want to. Right, let's go back to this. This is a print of my nan. The adult in the picture is my nan, and that's my mum. This picture was taken in round about 1925, and it was scanned in, but obviously it was only a very tiny picture, just 1 by 1 and a bit, not very much at all. So let's make it bigger. And you'll see it's got quite a lot of damage to it. There's quite a lot of coloration as well. And we want to get rid of some of this stuff. We're not going to be able to fix everything, but let's see how far we can get with this picture in the time we've got available. You can spend hours and hours on this. I'll give you fair warning. You could end up wasting half your life doing this, but you can do stuff fairly quickly. And once you've done a few of them, you get into a bit of a rhythm, get a bit of practice, and you can do stuff fairly quickly. The first tip I will give you is don't try and correct the color cast. Don't upscale the image. Don't do any of those tricks yet. They all come later. And the reason is that the changes we're going to make now use tools that analyze the pixels in the picture and try and guess what the pixels should be. So where the damage is, we're going to use tools that are going to try and guess what the pixels should be and fill in the missing pixels. If you've tweaked it, skewed it, straightened it, upscaled it, messed about with it, done all sorts of rubbish with it beforehand, some of those tools struggle and they don't get it right. So my first tip to you is leave the picture as is, get all the repairs done, and then start worrying about the color cast and the upscaling and things like that. So that's what I'm going to show you now. And I'm going to use a couple of techniques that you may or may not know about. Now, as with all these things, there's a dozen ways to do what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you one way. I'm going to show you a way that I learned through the Adobe training. It's not the only way, and you may have a better way. And if that works for you, fine. But I'm going to use a technique that is non-destructive, and for me, helps me to see what I've done and to understand what I've done. So the classic thing would be if you dive in now and start editing this, you're editing the original picture and you could make a mistake, and going backwards is a bit tedious. So normal convention would be you're told duplicate the layer. So get this layer 0 over here, make another copy of it and edit the copy. So you've always got this original layer to fall back on. And that's a valid way of doing things. I'm going to show you a different way. I'm going to make an empty layer. So there it is, layer 1. It's a blank layer and it's on top of the photo. And now I'm going to use some tools, and there's a couple of tools I'm going to use more than others. And you'll find those over here, and Photoshop calls them the, hang on, talk to me. Photoshop has the patch tool, the healing brush tool, and the spot healing brush tool. And I'll be hopping back and forth between those today. Adobe also have something called content aware correction. And what that means is that it uses a little bit of artificial intelligence to try and figure out what should be there and fill in the blanks. So I'm going to try and use that where I can, because generally it's pretty good. I'm going to start with the spot healing tool. And if you go up the top here, you should see that it says content aware. I could select create texture or proximity match, but I'm going to go with content aware. And the other trick, because of this technique that I'm using with the blank layer, you need to tick this little box here where it says sample all layers. If you don't do that, then what I'm about to do won't work. So there's a couple of little gotchas there. Content aware and sample all layers. Now what that means is that I'm going to be painting on this blank layer. I'm not touching the original photo. I'm going to be painting on top of it in a separate layer, but the tool is going to be analyzing all the layers to determine what pixels to paint. So although I'm painting on top, on a layer on top, is actually using the layer underneath to do the calculations. And to give you an example of how this works, if I just look at this area on the hat and just paint, hey presto, it's gone. There's a border here. Will it handle that? Yes, it will. Let me zoom in a bit. Now you see there's a little difference there, but remember we're zoomed in 600% at the moment. That may or may not show in the final photo. But there are techniques we can use to help soften that later. Now this eye around here is a tricky one. I'm going to leave that for the moment and I'm going to come back to it. But I'll keep painting down to about there. That's not doing a bad job. Down to about there. What about this cheek here? Not bad. Might need to come back to that. What about down here? Ooh, didn't like that, did it? No, doesn't like that. We'll come back to that. What about this? I'm going to make the brush a bit bigger so that it's sampling more pixels. That wasn't bad. That's pretty good. It's not doing a bad job, right? Now, when I'm coming in here, I'm going to make the brush a bit smaller because I want to be a little bit more careful with what I'm doing. See, it's not doing that very well. So what I'm going to do is change tools. I'm going to go into the clone tool here. And what the clone tool does is it copies pixels. So I'm going to say I want to take some of these pixels, copy them and put them here. So if I hold the Alt key down, it changes into a target, and that's where I'm going to copy from. And now I'm just painting just little dots. It's a little bit light, don't like that. Let me sample over here where it's darker. See if that's better. A little bit better. You see what I'm doing? I'm experimenting with where I'm painting from. Now that's not perfect, there's a few shadows there, but what I'm going to do now is use the blur tool and see if that helps me out here. Yeah, softens a bit. Now the healing brush tool. You see I'm hopping around different tools here to see if they will work for me. Now that's doing a slightly better job, the healing tool. The difference between the healing tool and the spot healing tool is the spot healing tool literally analyzes the pixels under the spot. And the bigger the spot, the more pixels it's analyzing. The healing tool enables you to look at other areas, similar areas. So what I'm able to do by using the Alt key, I can sample this area, and then when I'm healing, it's not copying. What it's doing is using that as a reference point, and you'll see it's getting it a little bit more accurate. If I come up here and come down here, I might be able to make a better job of this area. That's looking a bit better now. I'm going to zoom in a bit more because to repair this eye is going to be a bit tricky. The only thing I've got really is I've got this eye, so maybe I can copy bits of this eye over here. So if I use the clone tool again, and if I sample just on the white of the eye there, come over to roughly the same point there and paste there. That's not bad, that's coming. Let's do that here as well. See, we're getting there. The eye's coming. So there was no eye at all, but we're reconstructing the eye using other bits that are in the photo. I'm using that Alt key to sample and then just dab where I want it to go. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to use the healing brush up here, I think. Now I'll go back to the spot healing brush. What does this do? Yeah, don't like that. Need to spend a little bit more time on it. Just dabbing a little bit around there. And if you don't succeed on the first time, just keep trying, but be gentle with it. And if you don't like it, just undo it until you get what you're looking for. Sample a bit more down here, lighten it up a bit. Because I sampled in a lighter area, it's using that as a reference point and just lightening this very, very gently. It's got a bit spotty there because it's copying artifacts from other areas. So by just dabbing it in, so without the edits, with the edits, not bad, yeah? And that's in, what, 10, 15 minutes. Obviously, if you take longer, spend more time over it, you can do an even better job. Now this bit round here, I use the spot for that. That looks like some kind of necklace, so I don't want to remove it completely. Any dots like this, just click on them with the spot healing brush, just to soften them up a bit. Clean it up. Now, if you look at the layer over here, layer 1, you'll see there's all sorts of random dabs and dots and marks in there. And that's because that's where all these edits are going. They're not going in layer 0 at all. They're all going on layer 1. Look, horse and cart, that dates it, right? So, without edits, with edits. Now, there's obviously a lot more I could do if I had the time, but you get the principle, yeah? And if you look at this layer on its own, those are all the edits I've done, but they're completely separate from the original. So this is a non-destructive way of doing it. Excuse me. A non-destructive way of making these edits so that you can do them, undo them, redo them. And if you don't like that, you can turn off the layer and create a new layer and start again. Or you could have all the edits to one area in one layer and all the edits to another area in another layer. You can separate out the work however you want. Anyone got any questions before I go on to the next bit?
Yeah, hi, Ray, it's Kathy. How did you select when you went to the hat and selected the source, how did you do that again?
Sure. With these tools, not all of them, but some of them, particularly the healing brush tool and the clone tool, they allow you to sample another part of the picture. So with the clone tool, that's probably the easiest one to understand. It looks like a rubber stamp symbol, and that's exactly what it's doing. It's rubber stamping. And what that does is, if I zoom into the area again to make it a bit easier, and I'll make the brush bigger. When you're cloning, you're copying. You're literally copying pixels. So you've got to say, well, where do you want to copy from? And there's a keyboard sequence. On the Mac, it's the Alt key. On Windows, it might still be the Alt key. But if
Okay, I found it. That's what I couldn't work out. It works now.
if you press
I'm
and
doing this
hold,
as you talk. Yeah, Alt, and then I can select the area.
that's it.
Right.
And the same goes for the healing brush tool. But the difference with the clone tool and the healing brush tool is that the clone tool will copy the pixels unaltered and completely and put them where you put them. The healing brush tool will take the point that you reference and use it as a guide. It's not using it as a direct copy. It's saying, this is my base point. Now analyze the pixels where I want to paint and use that base point as your reference. And that gives you a softer, more subtle edit. And often it gets you out of trouble just with one stroke. Sometimes you have to experiment. Sometimes you have to sample in different areas to get the effect you're looking for. Any other questions?
Do you alter the flow of the brushes, Ray, or do you just take it 100%?
I use it as is. I don't change the flow, but you could do if you wanted to. You just get a more subtle effect. Yeah. And also, as I said earlier, with the spot healing tool, for example, you've got this content aware thing, which I find quite useful. You've also got proximity match, which again is similar, but it's more restricted. It's not so smart. It's just analyzing the adjacent pixels and saying, well, if this pixel is this color and brightness, chances are the one next to it's going to be roughly the same. And then if your target, if you make the brush size big enough, it can say, well, actually, I can see the shade and brightness changing from that direction going in this direction. Therefore, this pixel I'll make in the same, I'll change it accordingly. So it will put a gradient in for you based on what it thinks it should do. So it's quite smart. Okay, so now this, we got some vignetting going on here at the bottom and at the top. There's not a lot you can do about that without it looking really obvious. So I tend not to try with stuff like that. What I do often do is I'll go in with a blur tool here and there and just soften some of the edits I've made, just so that it just softens it a smidge. I don't like this edit up here in particular, so I could go in with the spot again and just clean that up a little bit. I'll go in with a clone tool, real fine, to get, because the shape, that's all blurred there and I don't like it. Now bearing in mind this picture is 1 inch by 1 and a bit, so I'm being really pedantic now. I'm going to copy these pixels. This is the clone tool, so it's literally copying. I just want to get that hat tidied up a little bit so it looks a little bit more natural. That looks a little bit better now. That deck chair is looking just about right. Yeah? So, okay, now we've got that, we can think about color casts and things like that. There is a bit of a color cast on this, so I'm going to add an adjustment layer, which is this little icon in the bottom right. It's like a half moon. It's a circle with a diagonal through it. And that gives me a pop-up. And let's have a black and white layer in there. So that's now changing everything to black and white. And you'll notice it's got rid of a bit of a stain that was around here. Didn't have to worry about removing that. Just by going black and white, it got rid of it for me. So that helped. I can use the auto function to tweak around with that. And I might want to put something like a levels command in as well, a levels adjustment layer, and just tweak the blacks and the whites a little bit, just to give it a bit more contrasty. And that could be it if I wanted to leave it as a black and white picture. Let me take all these adjustments, select them all in the levels, and create a group. And that's the little folder icon down here. And I'll call that my edits. So all my edits are now grouped together. They're still there. I can expand the levels, but they're all in one little folder, which means I can turn them all on and off very easily to see the difference in what I've done. Good. Now, someone I asked, it might have been Tony, I can't remember, about colorizing old photos. And yes, you can do that. It's a lot of work, but it can be done. And what I'll do is show you one way of doing it. There are many ways. I'll show you one way. Again, this is the Adobe way. They give you 3 or 4 different ways, and this is the first one they show you, which kind of makes sense to me. And it's using masks, as you would expect. And what they say is add a solid color layer to the picture. And what I'm going to do is when you add that solid color, it also adds a layer mask as well. But what I want to do is change the color to something more flesh-like. And actually, if you Google flesh tones and hex, skin tones hex will do it for you. It will give you the hexadecimal code that goes in here. And if you punch that in, it gives you a flesh tone. Now, that's no good because I've hidden the entire picture with a flesh tone. What I want to do is apply this flesh tone just to the parts of the skin in the photo. And I can use the layer mask for that. So if I go to the layer mask, and I'm going to fill it with black using the paint bucket tool. So now you see the layer mask is totally filled with black. And you may remember from the masking we've done in the past, black is show, white is hide, or the other way around. So you use black and white to show and unshow the colors. So what this is doing now is the black is hiding all of the skin tone so you can't see it. But if I now use the mask, I can let the skin tone show through. So if I use a brush and change the color to white, give myself a smaller brush, I'm now painting on the mask. the first thing I'm going to do before I do that is I'm going to change the blend mode of the layer. Each layer can be blended differently in the photo. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to change the blend mode to color. Now, you don't have to remember all this stuff. It'll be in the recording of this video, but also if you Google it on the Adobe site, they give you step-by-step instructions anyway. And there's a gazillion videos on doing this. But now I'm painting white on my mask to reveal the skin tone below. Now you could argue that this isn't a skin tone, and that's fine, but what you can do is once you've got these masks in place, you can tweak the colours afterwards. And again, bearing in mind, I'm being rather quick here because you can spend many, many hours with this. Now, because I'm using a mask, it's entirely editable. And you see I've gone over a little bit here. So if I change the colour to black now, because I'm now painting black, I can just tidy that up. I could, for example, now add another solid colour layer, and I could fill that with maybe a code for York stone. And yes, if you Google it, you'll find the hex colour for York stone. If I now fill my mask with black and I now start painting white, I can now start painting. Oh, I need to use the blend mode of colour. You'll notice the colour lets the texture through underneath. So I can now start painting the stonework in the background. Etc., etc. And maybe this overcoat is a navy overcoat, so let's have a nice navy colour in there. This is a hex code for navy. Oh, it's a bit bright. Perhaps we need to make it darker. I'm going to drag that down there a bit. That's a bit better. Again, I'm going to fill the mask with black. And now I'm going to start brushing white where I want the navy to come through. Oh, colour mode again. Keep forgetting that. There we go. Now she's got a rather bright navy coat. And you can spend hours and hours and hours doing this if you want to. Now, I know I've gone through that at a fair old lick, but I think the important messages here, and we've done masking and non-destructive editing a few times now, and we've done it over the last few weeks. What this is doing is bringing a lot of those techniques together. And yeah, I'm ploughing through it because I'm comfortable and familiar with this stuff. And you won't be, and you'll falter, and it won't work the way you expect it to. But don't worry, you will get it. You just got to keep at it, and you just got to practice it. And once you practice it, the best way to practice this stuff is to dig out the old family album from the attic and plod your way through it. It's a job you've been meaning to do for years, I know. But I tell you, if you get a dozen or more photos out and you start to do this to those photos, you'll get slicker and slicker and slicker, and you'll develop your own techniques. But the important thing is what I've done over here on the layers side. Firstly, using this layer, an empty layer, to do all my edits in, is a really quick and easy way to do non-destructive editing. And it saves you duplicating the layer and all that stuff as well. It's really quick. Then you can change your black and white and your levels and all the rest of it to that. I group them together just for convenience. And then you can start colorizing, if you want to colorize, by basically adding a solid color layer on top, but then you mask out the bits, you mask it all out so it doesn't show, and you just let the bits show where you want them to show. And by changing the blend mode to color, it preserves the texture of the underlying picture. Now, we talked about this flesh color. I should call this skin. This one stone, and this one coat. Just for completeness, we talked about the color of this skin. If I double click that, I can go back and tweak. So if I don't like the hex code, I can sort of start dragging around. And you'll notice that the face, the two faces are changing color as I do this. So you can move around and find a skin tone that you're comfortable with. Maybe that's a little bit better, not quite so orangey. And the same goes for the others too. Once you've got them up there, you can make just a hint of blue now on that coat. You can tweak it. Once you've got the masks done, you can go back and tweak as many times as you want. Yeah? Any more questions on this bit?
Where'd you get the codes from, Ray?
Good old Google. Let me show you. I will do it live.
Oh,
If I can find it. Oh, I haven't got, bear with. It helps if I launch the browser, doesn't it? There she is. Okay. So let's say I want skin, color, tone, hex. Skin tone, color palette, hex codes. There you go. There's the hex codes for those skin tones.
Do these hex codes, are they really degrees of RGB?
Yes, if you look here, you've got your RGB values there.
Ah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So you can tweak them slightly just by, if you want to put a bit more red in, by increasing the first number.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Okay.
I use the hex codes quite a lot because often there's a hex code out there for the color you're looking for, and it's a good starting point, and it gets you going. So you can, it gets the RGB in the ballpark that you want, and then you can tweak from there. Although, as you saw, you know, I was dragging the pointer around because I find that a bit more interactive.
Yep.
And the same goes for York stone, color, tone, hex. There you go, first hit. There's different shades of York stone with different colour codes. Again, they get you in the ballpark. Some of them may or may not work for you, but at least it gives you a starting point.
Yep.
Any other questions on that?
It's good.
Okay, let me stop showing that and go back to good old Photoshop.
Ray,
Yeah,
just a quick keyboard shortcut for you. When you've got the mask white, if you press Control or Command I, it inverts the mask.
yeah,
Yeah. Just
Yep.
speeds it up a little bit.
yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, there are loads of keyboard shortcuts that help you with this stuff. Okay, so this is now at 500% magnification. Let's take the colorizing out because it's not really complete. So we just get back to the black and white image. If I take it to 100%, that's how big it is. But you can upscale the picture. And there's a keyboard shortcut that I use all the time because it's in my brain. Although it's 3 keys, it's Command Alt I on the Apple. It's probably Control Alt I on the Windows machine, but it's basically image size. You can get to it from the image menu as well. Image size, yeah? Image size there gets you to the same place. And it shows you the original size of the image. And you can display it in inches, pixels, or centimeters. When you're displaying in inches and centimeters, it's using the dots per inch to calculate. So if I look at pixels, it's actually 400 pixels square, give or take. And at 300 dots per inch, which is what you'd want for printing purposes, that gives you an inch and a bit each way. But if you look at this original size, you can actually upscale the picture. So I can upscale the picture to a 5:7 at 300 dpi. And there we are. And it's not done a bad job of upscaling. It's filled in, it's created pixels basically, because this is now a 300 dpi image at a 5:7 format size. So what it's done is it's looked for missing pixels and filled in the blanks and upscaled it. Now, if I'd have done this before I'd done all the edits would have been more difficult because those pixels that it's filled in look okay on the eye and they look okay to print, but they may not have been okay for some of the tools I was using. And I've found that if I do it that way round, I get artifacts in my edited photo that I don't want. So to avoid all those artifacts, I find it's easier to do all the editing at the original size of the print. And then when you're done with your editing, then upscale last. So now I can create a restored, adjusted, decolored, nasty marks removed photo at 5 or 6 times the original size of the picture taken in 1925. So now you can print it, export it as a JPEG for web purposes or whatever you want.
And now it's a 77 meg picture.
And now it's what?
77 meg picture.
It's a big picture now.
It's not a big file to save. It's totally different. The two things are totally different. the file size and the file in the picture size are totally different.
Yeah. But if I exported this now as a JPEG, if I save as a JPEG, let's see what size it would be. Maximum resolution. Ha! It's less than a meg. If I show you that,
Yeah, people are worried about the size of pictures because all of the people that buy pictures off you ask for 70 to 80 meg pictures and they say, I can't do it. But they don't realise that upscaling it doesn't make the file size bigger.
no. So this shows you that it's now 1500 pixels by 1681. It was 400 odd before. And the file size is just under a meg. And if I display that, is that displaying for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not bad. It would print better because here it's showing a lot larger than the print would be. Any questions with that, guys?
Pretty good.
I mean, I know it's pretty mind-boggling if you've not done it before, and I squeezed it into about 40 odd minutes, which is, you know, hairy. But I think if you have a go, what's the worst you can do?
Be on the wrong layer.
Well, that's true. Actually, that is a very good point, Paul, and you know because you've done it many times like I have. And I'm going to show your picture in a moment because Paul has spent, he must have been, I dread to think how many hours.
I started off when I was 14. Doing that.
But the important thing is a very good
You
point.
didn't have electricity when you were 14.
You've got to be on the right layer when you're doing this stuff, okay?
That's the bugger. If you're not on the right layer.
And you remember I said, let me go back to Photoshop again. I talked about these layers and I said, oh, you know, by doing all the edits on this layer here, it's brilliant because you're not affecting the original layer. However, it's very easy when you're thrashing around doing your edits to somehow, and I think it's the little fairies in the back of the room, somehow that layer gets selected and you don't realize it.
It's the gremlins.
It's the gremlins. So now you're editing your original, all right? So just be careful that you are on the right layer. And the way I would do this, and I suppose it's bad of me, I should have said it up front. Although actually I started with a PSD. I'd already imported the scanned image into Photoshop and saved it out as a PSD file. If you do that first, so you now are working on a file that has been saved as a PSD, any error or mess up that you make, if all else fails, you've still got the original scanned image that you could import again into Photoshop and start from scratch. So there is a way backwards, but it is a good practice just to make sure you're on that right layer, because it can be tragic if you're not and you realize it way too late. Been there, done that, and I know Paul has too. So let me pull in a picture in good Blue Peter fashion that Oh, hang on, I didn't mean to do that. Let me close this. So this is a picture that Paul, in a very rash moment, agreed to try and edit for someone. Gary Mallion, wasn't it?
That was Gary Walklett, wasn't it?
Walklett.
Yeah.
Yes, he could have taken out all the crease marks and the other blemishes using the techniques I've shown you, but he obviously had way too much time on his hands.
I was only 14.
Because he then went and did this.
Wow.
Now, given what you just saw me do with colorizing, you now know how long it took him to do that. Did you use similar techniques, Paul?
Well, it was very interesting because I had no idea how to do it. And I went on to the interweb, of course, and there was, I think it was an American girl, and we didn't actually do it using those blank layers. We did, I think, I may have used the blank layers, but we didn't use the colorizing method of creating a mask. It was done by adjusting the hue, and you just slid the hue slider along. That's why I tried to give every one of the participants of the play a slightly different coloured costume. So there should be no two costumes alike. It was done on the hue slider, which is just a variation on a theme. But basically, the principles are the same. And the other thing is that, of course, where there's bits of the thing missing, the corners were all frayed. If you go back to the black and white, you're second guessing really what was there. And of course, the joy of it is, once you've done it, no one knows whether it is right or wrong, do they?
That's right.
So
well, you're blinding them with bright colours. They can't see anything else.
It was a pantomime of, I think the figure in brown, third from the right, standing, was his father or grandfather. I'm not sure. It might have been his father in a Salvation Army play of whenever. It was an old thing. So it would have been a very colourful scene, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure about this guy, though. I think immigration may have a word with him.
Steady. It was good fun. But if anyone wants the original black and white to have a go at, I'll gladly send it to them. And perhaps another editing challenge for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, that's what I had to say about that. I hope you found it useful. By all means, go back to the video. If you really want to be even more confused, you're welcome. And, you know, when we get together again, no doubt we'll have a chance to go over some of this again in person. And if you're really stuck, let me know. And if I can, I'll help you out. And I'm sure Paul wouldn't mind doing the same as well. So have a crack at it. The way I started was I got some old family photos and I just tarted them up a little bit, kept them black and white, kept it simple, and the family were just so grateful. And it gives you the encouragement and the enthusiasm to do a bit more. And then you just build and build your skills, and you know, to think, well, will this work? No, it won't. Will that work? And that's how you do it, you know. And I always find I can't learn stuff just by watching a video. I have to have a real project in mind with an end point. And I find that gives me the drive I need to bash my head against a brick wall until I get it right. So anyway, good for that.
Ray,
Yes.
when you print it out, you had a resolution of 300. If you increase that, what's it difference does it make?
Sorry, I missed the question. Say again, Tony.
When you print it out, you had a resolution of 300. What difference does it make if you increase that resolution?
What, more than 300?
Yeah.
Not a lot. The human eye, but depends who you believe, but as far as I know, the science that's out there says that the human eye can't resolve more than 300 dpi. So you could print at 600 dpi, but I'm not sure the eye would be able to tell you the difference.
A couple of print shops like 410 for some reason.
Say that again?
A couple of print shops like 410 for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But
they can charge more.
yeah, maybe, or it might be to, you know, align with their equipment, or there might be a fiddle factor that gives them room to maneuver. I don't know, but there's no point going to 600 or 1,000 or anything like that. It doesn't really buy you anything if you're printing at those resolutions.
Files.
With the scanning at 600 dpi is worth doing, because there may well be data in there that you can't see that when you upscale, you'll get the benefit of. So I would say scan high, but when you come to print, you may not need to go above 300.
We went to 600, you'd have a massive file.
Yep.
If anyone does photo books, and I've done two in this lockdown period, one of the requirement for the photo book that I use is only 200, and for digital printing, but they come back fine.
Yeah.
It's like you said, you know, you can't. I'm not sure that if it was higher resolution, whether their equipment would print it any better, and if it did, would I see the difference? I suspect probably not. I don't know for sure.
I mean, I think I've not done any real quantitative experiments, but I would expect 150, you could get an A4 print at 150 dpi and probably not realize that it's a low quality print. If you can avoid it, do so. But if you can't avoid it, like when you're restoring old photos like this, I wouldn't want to push that photo I showed you above what I did. And also the family don't expect it. The family don't expect a 10 by 8 from a postage size stamp print. So, you know, why knock yourself out? There's enough work to do to restore the picture. If you can create a picture that's postcard sized, that doesn't have all those awful crease marks in or stains on it, and no color cast because it's aged with time, the family will love you to bits.
I'm going to use a digital 72.
Yeah, I mean, 72 dpi is a common number quoted because in years gone by, the computer screen you were looking at on your computer was 72 dpi. And so there was no point having photos above 72 dpi because the screen couldn't show them. But now with 4K screens, I mean, I've got a 5K screen in front of me. You've got 4K tellies. You've got iPads that are nudging 3 or 4K. The days of the 72 dpi for screen work are gone. I would say for camera club stuff, when we're showing it on our projector, then 1920 by 1080 is what the projector is capable of. So there's no point doing it higher than that. If in the future we get better projector, then we might up it. If you're showing it on a TV at home and it's an HD TV, 1920 by 1080 is all you need. If it's a 4K TV, well then clearly it's going to be more than that. So just match the resolution to the medium. And if it's print, 300 dpi down to 200. And if it's screen, I would keep it for HD TV or 4K TV would be the 2 yardsticks I would recommend. Okay, I've just got a couple more slides and then we can call it a night because we're a bit over. Where are we? Where did you go? There we are. So, I think we did all those. Next week, we have a guest speaker joining us. Robert Pugh was going to join us on the 10th before lockdown, and we've had a chat with him, and he's got a 2-hour presentation, but we felt 2 hours was probably a bit too long for a Zoom session. So he's agreed to do the 10th and the 17th, 1 hour each. So he's going to be the next 2 meetings. And he said he would talk about his photography with a mirrorless camera in the first session. And then in the second session, he'll go through some of his personal projects. So you'll get a rest from my voice for the next couple of meetings. And I'll top and tail as usual, but there'll be someone else to listen to for the next 2 meetings.
Will it work the same way, Ray? We just come on to you and then you'll just put everyone through, or?
Say that again?
I said, will it work the same way? Will you send out a code and then we just come on to your meeting and it'll be there, yeah?
Yeah, it'll be the same code as before, all as normal. And we'll do what we did with Angela last week. I'll make him a co-host so that he can do his thing. But it's still on our system, as it were. Just to remind you that this Friday is the deadline for the photo editing challenge. And we got some great entries so far, so keep them coming. This Friday, please. And the June submissions for Fluoro, just a reminder, are the 19th of June. So you've got a couple of weeks on that. But I just thought I'd remind you.
There are other butters.
Thanks, Pete.
So my mind's boggled, I tell you.
You're well and truly buttered.
I am. When it's downloading.
Right. Well, any more questions? Anyone got anything to say? Otherwise, we'll close the session.
Very interesting, right?
That's good. Interesting.
Very good. Very good.
Okay, cool. Well then, thanks everyone. Be safe. See you next week.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Ray.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Darren.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Big.
Bye, Esme.
Bye, Esme.
Bye.
Bye.
Well done, boy.